Hello and welcome to AXSChat. We're delighted to have Nicola James with us today. Nicola is the Chief Exec of Lexxic and was introduced to me through the British Assistive Technology Association and Anthony Ruck, who is the chair. So we've chatted before, but for the sake of our audience, please tell us a bit about yourself and how you, what Lexxic does and how you came to be working in the field.
My name's Nicola James, and I always loved psychology and I always loved to study, but I always compared myself to my brother. My brother got A grades and I would work harder than him and I didn't get the grades, so I thought I should get, given the amount of work I put in. So rolling forward to university, I did a presentation, a psychology presentation, and I got a first for that, but I failed my write-up, and I said, there must be something going on for me here. And I ended up getting diagnosed with dyslexia. I was in my early 20s and I just found it very mixed feelings of relief, but also feeling slightly angry and overwhelmed that I wasn't diagnosed earlier. I met the most amazing lady. So I got into Nottingham University with a 2-2 in my degree. And for Americans, it's a lower level degree. So you get the degree, but you don't necessarily have the grade, which is a 2-1 or above, to get into the master's course you want to get into. And I wrote to the university and I wrote to a really good guy and just explained my circumstances. And I got on the course. And then I was there and I was like, well, I need some form of help. Met this amazing lady called Margaret Harrington. Margaret Harrington is one of the founders of the Nottingham Dyslexia Department, and she has written a lot around the area of dyslexia, and she's a specialist teacher in the area. And she gave me help, and I cannot tell you what that did for me. Within about 8 weeks of support, my grades for my written work went through the roof, and my grades for my reading, my ability to read at speed, hugely improved with technologies, and the difference was so astronomical to me. I was like, I've got to pass this on to other people. I've got to pass these skills on to other people, because it's almost like that opened such an amazing opportunity for me, which I feel that if I hadn't had that support, I definitely wouldn't be where I am today. I would have the ideas and the creativity and the entrepreneurial edge that I have, but I definitely wouldn't have become a chartered psychologist. So Lexxic is around passing on the ideas that were given to me, which was around taking the strategies that I'd learned. So Lexxic's been around for 10 years. So I took those strategies on, and then I applied some of the stuff I knew, applied some of the theory I knew, and we've developed strategies and dyslexia assessments. We work with ADHD, we work with companies like Barclays, RBS, etc. And we're passing what we've done. The key for Lexxic is that we have all this amazing work from amazing clients, but we also make sure we have events all around the country that are totally free, so that people can access our work for free, so that people that can't afford services get access to psychologists and get to ask those questions, which I was fortunate enough to have access to.
Yeah, I think that's hugely important. As someone else that was diagnosed actually in my late 20s, and had always had issues where effectively orally did fantastically well, and then you find that the grades mismatched. I think it is hugely important, and when you have that diagnosis, yes, it's a cathartic moment. Yes, actually, it's a very emotional one, and it's definitely mixed emotions. But it also triggers off something in you that you want. Definitely, there's that passion to want to share, and that's why we're here. It's we've all got some reason behind why we're here and why we're engaged in the industry, and yours and mine are very similar. With
to conquer the world and teach everyone about the strategies.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, in my case, less around the strategies, but yes, world domination is on the target. So, but yeah, so effectively, it's hugely important. It's really great to hear that you're doing stuff for free. I mean, we put all of this stuff out for free because, again, we want people to know about it. We want to know people to understand about the liberating capabilities of technology, the empowerment that people can have, that they need not feel ashamed because they're dyslexic or dyspraxic or neurodiverse. I think it's hugely important. Huge numbers of people. We absolutely need to get people feeling comfortable talking about it and getting access. Deborah, I know you've got a question. I've prattled on, and so I'll hand over to you.
No, I think it's an important. I think it's an important phenomena. I don't know if that's the right word, but that both of you got diagnosed as adults. And so, of course, I also wonder what would happen. How would your lives have been different? Certainly, they would have been less frustrating if you had been diagnosed earlier. I was thinking about, Nicola, as you were explaining, your story. I have a son and I have a daughter, and my daughter is older than my son, and my daughter Sarah has Down syndrome, so significant learning disabilities, obviously, and intellectual disabilities. But she always worked harder than my son. And she developed really good study habits and stuff because she just had to work so much harder. So of course I understand the value in the skills that you had to learn trying to survive this. But I think still in the world, we teach students one way. And if you happen to be, if your brain is wired in that way, you're going to be a better student, and we're going to decide you are going to be a better individual. You're going to work better in society. You should have better jobs, blah, 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 blah. But the reality is our brains work so differently from each other. And it's quite a shame that we are not focused on teaching people in the ways that best work for their brains. And so along your school, no teacher ever thought to ask you, why, when you are applying, should we just assume you're lazy? Should we just assume Neil is not motivated? Should we assume, well, why is she doing so well, or Neil doing so well with this, but not good over here? Why? So I think we still have a lot of evolving to do in society, and the way we teach people, and the way we decide that they add or do not add value. And if they don't add value, why? And so I agree with Neil, the work that you're doing and the work that you're giving away for free to make sure others don't have so much, such a hard path. And of course, we walk these hard paths, and it makes us these people that we are. It makes us amazing people. And so I understand the need for life to season us real good, but I just think just using two examples, yours and Neil's, and the path that you both walked, and were able to overcome ridiculous odds that were thrown at you. And instead of assuming that maybe there was an opportunity to teach you in a different way, we just told you that you're a D student, or a 2-point level student. So I think what we're talking about here is even broader than the obvious. I know that Antonio has a comment, so let me turn it over to him too. And you and Neil might want to also comment on what I was saying, but I'll turn it over to Antonio first.
Thank you, Deborah. No, I remember when I was a kid, and during some of my years in secondary school, or even going back to that, where sometimes a kid that was not paying attention or was not that active, and the teacher, oh, maybe I should put him in at the end of the class. It's almost like, oh, he's just not paying enough attention, or he's disturbing others. So sometimes it's lack of empathy of trying to identify what is happening with that person, and say, no, how can we actually help him, instead of throwing him away to a place where he's not disturbing anyone. And sometimes I know a case or a kid who actually were doing that. He was actually having difficulties in a class. I'm still his friend today, because he had problems with his eyes. He was not able to see well, so he was making an effort, behaving strangely in front, because he was trying. Nobody asked him, "Can you see what the teacher is actually writing in the board?" Nobody ever asked him that. So only later in time, when he was about 12, they identified that he needed prescription glasses.
Wow.
A question of asking and empathy. And I think uh, more especially when teachers are under stress and they have a lot of kids in class, they tend to behave like that because and today there's so much pressure to cut costs here and there, and sometimes also in a very difficult situation that they don't really have time for empathy in the classroom.
Yeah.
I think that one of the things that I notice is that when a child is young, we tend to externalize our value, and a lot of that value is placed upon our grades. So the way that the educational system tends to work, it tends to support, as Deb was talking about, sequential thinking and ability to get thoughts down in a sequential order. So I know that if I was in a discussion, I would do really well. If I was speaking, I would do really well. But the proportion of my grades at school were focused on my ability to read and taking the information and apply my thoughts on paper. And so I do think that the way that the world is designed doesn't necessarily, in terms of academia, doesn't necessarily take into account broadly in terms of what makes up most of the grades, the different skills that you need in jobs and in life, like the creative skills you need, the entrepreneurial skills you need. And when I look at my brother and I go, he's so academic, he's so detailed, but then I'm so bigger picture. And actually, if you look at my family, we all have different skills, but together we make up a team. And when I look at my team and the people I employ, some people have dyslexia, some people don't. And we find that different people are good at different things. But together, everyone as a team brings a bigger picture and helps our organisation progress. So I think the thing which I find is that because of academia putting so much emphasis on the written word, that sometimes what that makes an individual feel with dyslexia, for example, is I am not good enough, I am broken, there is something wrong with me. And one of the things that I've really found is so powerful for someone with dyslexia, and I think this is similar to other neurodiverse conditions, we find it with ADHD definitely, and also Asperger's, or people that have returned to work after a stroke, is that if they go into their internal dialogue loop and they ask themselves the question, what is your general thought? I know that mine was, I'm not good enough. And actually, I didn't realise, I wasn't conscious that it was that. And therefore, I was like, I'm going to work hard and I'm going to prove myself. But if you make people aware of that thought, then they can start to be mindful of it. They can start to observe that thought and they can go, hey, actually, I am good enough. And the reason I'm good enough is I can do this, I can do this. And if somebody starts to look at their strengths and balances up the picture that they're looking at, then if they find their strengths and they understand what they're good at, then suddenly I think more opportunities open, because you start to look at the world as what can I do, rather than the world is against me. But I definitely think because of education and the way it's designed, somebody who learns differently might experience that negative reinforcement, and that because we're externalizing so much based upon our grades.
I think I definitely agree with you about the focus on the written word. What was interesting for me was that my first degree, I was in denial about dyslexia. My first degree, I managed to do okay because I went to one of the few institutions that still had a very much oral tradition. So I was at Oxford, and actually we didn't submit that much written work. I could write a load of scrawl with lots of crossings out, which would never be seen, because you sit down one-to-one and you have a discussion. It was only when it comes to exam time that it became hard and problematic. Yes, the reading was hard, and the amount of reading that you had to do was challenging, but you can find ways to cope, you know. But actually, it's only in relatively recent times and recent centuries where there's been this primacy of the written word over oral, and I think that is going to end. That is not going to continue, and that actually we're once again going to feel freer again, because when I'm looking at technology, I'm looking at speech interfaces and stuff like that. The way that we interact with computers, because we're not interacting with paper so much, is changing. We're not typing so much. We're speaking into our computers. The next generation, you know, they said, oh, they're the texting generation. You're going to have text thumb. Well, actually, the generation after that, they're not using their thumbs. They're dictating. so that you've got a mixture of the written word and dictation, so that the way that we're interacting is going to change, and hopefully that's going to change people's perceptions of value of it, and change how we access and disseminate knowledge. And hopefully that's going to remove a bunch of barriers, because essentially everybody's going to be using assistive technology. So I hold out some hope for the future there. So I'm very interested also. You say you run these events around the country. Can you tell us a little bit more about them and how people can access them?
It's really good. So what we did is, I think Lexxic has always been good. We always have a great service that we deliver, but we haven't been so good at shouting about that we're here. And what started to happen is we partnered with Dyslexia in Scotland, and Vicky, my colleague, runs events with them. They vary. Ask also what people want to hear. So it might be something around confidence, or it might be around mindfulness techniques, or it might be an event around reading skills or how to write a CV. And so we call them meetups or events, and then we've started to change our events slightly. So having run them in Manchester and down in London, what we decided to do was, start to interview people. So we've had things like a dyslexic, a lawyer who works in employment law. She came along and did a piece around equality and the equality duty. We had some entrepreneurs talk around their businesses, and that was really nice, because there was a guy who used to work at Barclays called Chris, and he ended up getting the confidence to set his own business up. And this is about 5 years ago. And he set his own recruitment business up. He did really well. He's really good at sales and relationships. And he's now sold that business, and with that money, he decided to invest in part of a plane. And, I think it's just so nice to see these stories of people just opening up and breaking through that barrier of I can't do to actually I can do, but I've got to work out which area I can do it in. So we have those events. And then I was like, I want to take this message further. So we launched this product called Neuro Talent Unlocked, and we spent about 4 years. We interviewed loads of people with dyslexia and ADHD, and we filmed this e-learning, and it looked awful. Like literally, I had orange hair, and I was like, oh my God, we can't launch this. So we went back to the drawing board, and we got a script writer in, and we've got these sort of BBC level film modules, and we're starting to take those out there. So quite a lot of people are using them around the UK. And like a couple of days ago, we had some interest from the US, so that's really exciting. And my cousin works in Google on the West Coast, so we're talking to him. So it's just really exciting. I think it's about taking what we know, using all these fantastic mediums, sharing it with the world, and making it as cheap as possible for people, so that people have access to these strategies. Because the more we can share and the more we learn, the more I think I'm really pleased about the journey I've been on. And I think in relation to an earlier point, my life could have been different, but I wouldn't want it to be different. But I definitely can take what I've learned and make a difference to somebody else. And for me, I think if you can make any difference to somebody of that moving from I can't do to I can do, and giving someone the strategies that helps them to cope and makes it easier for them, that just opens so many more doors. Because what I've found is that if you just assess somebody or diagnose somebody, then they get to that point and go, I have this. And they might go, oh, I'm not good enough. Or they might go into a role of sort of feeling upset. Whereas if you can take them up the other way and give them the strategies afterwards, then they suddenly go, oh, look, I've been diagnosed and I've got the strategies that align with my diagnosis, and I'm starting to see success. So for me, it's about making sure that, you have these strategies, you make them as accessible as possible. And that's why we just started to use different mediums, because I've got a small company, I have 12 or 13 employees, but I can't, their time is limited as my time is. But what's really cool is I might be in Dublin, for example, I'll be in a taxi, and the taxi driver talks about his daughter who has dyslexia. And I go, oh, we have e-learning. And I just give him the access for free. And suddenly I've helped his daughter. And it's such a great way of being able to help people, because you've got something up there that just makes such a big difference.
Yeah. Deborah, I know you've got another question.
Well, I do. I'm really fascinated with what you're doing, and I agree. I mean, we want to help other people, and so, but how, how can we tie this into the employment cycle? How can we bring what you're doing, and maybe you're already doing it, how do we bring it to the employers? Because we know as societies that a diverse team is more beneficial to the bottom line. We have all data.
Let me interrupt that just to add something to Deborah's question, is because sometimes we might have people out there who are applying for jobs, could be on LinkedIn, could be in by other means, that don't understand why they are being rejected or not being accepted, and the reason is because they were never diagnosed.
Yeah. So I think, like, for what we're doing, sort of maybe more at a UK level, we've just become, say, a strategic partner of the Business Disability Forum. So, through doing things like podcasts and doing things like working with partners like that, you can share evidence of best practice. We're writing a newsletter with them around what RBS have done. We've just completed a study with Barclays on e-learning. So you can share best practice. What that then links you in, there's a few groups going on around things like the recruitment of neurodiversity and best practice around that. I think that's really good as a starting point. But I think if you want to, say, hit different countries and you want to make sure you share that practice, I think the best thing I've found across companies is when they have a group that's talking about maybe neurodiversity. If employees are talking about neurodiversity and they have these groups set up, you tend to find it influences practice across the organisation. Because one thing, and also if you have somebody that's maybe quite senior that says, I have dyslexia or I have a condition, then it starts to have a different onus. And if you have the groups and people can talk about, these are best practice tips, so this is what you can do in things like the recruitment and selection process, that's a really great way of sharing best practice. And then the other thing that's quite powerful is all these things around talent. So there are so many people that are coming out with neurodiverse conditions, both across the States, in the UK particularly, around, people like Bill Gates, Steve Jobs. And if these people have achieved so much, but they're said to be thinking differently or have a neurodiverse condition, then you sort of look at them and you go, they've achieved so much. And actually, it's their talents, it's their strategic brain, it's that bigger picture, which is very much complemented by the detail person. Like my first employee was same sort of similar morals, similar values, but Vicky has much more attention to detail, and together it just works so well. So I think if you can sort of emphasize that we all have different strengths and strengths fall into different areas. The salesman, the bigger picture, the ability to think outside the box, that helps bring business in. The bigger picture and the strategy, well, it helps to formalize where we're going. And then the detail can help systemize where that strategy, what it looks like, etc. So I definitely think with more people speaking about their condition, it raises awareness and reduces the stigmas associated with neurodiverse conditions. It starts to shine light on the benefits.
Yeah, it's hugely important. The role models issue is really a key one. We know that organizations struggle with that, especially with senior leaders. And when they do finally come out, it makes a huge difference. It's something that we're encouraging within our own organization, and also encouraging them to step up and be part of the networks as well. So we've got staff networks. We're finding them to be, as you mentioned, really useful. Again, like yourselves, we're members of the Business Disability Forum. We work with Purple Space, and of course they're working alongside Barclays, who do a lot in the space of work around staff networks and so on. And of course they support AXSChat. So thank you, Barclays. Have to get that in there. But essentially, it's getting these conversations out in the open is what makes change. People, yes, they have a right to keep stuff private, but it doesn't help move the agenda forwards. So whilst I absolutely defend everyone's right to privacy, I'm out there and I'm encouraging people to talk about it, because it's only through talking about it that we encourage other people to feel safe talking about it, and you create that sea change. So I totally agree with you. I think it's really important, and of course, yeah, I have weaknesses as well as strengths, and I try and hire people around me that are strong where I am weak, and you know what? That's a sign of a of a good manager. I'm not saying I'm a good manager, by the way. Ask Antonio, because I'm not going to say it for myself. But and ask him off camera when I'm not there, because otherwise it's not fair. But yeah, essentially, I'm completely agreeing with you that this is something that is important, and it's part of human diversity, and neurodiversity is just another expression of that. Deborah, did you want to follow up? I'm prattling on again.
No, but I think this is just such an important conversation, and I think also, sometimes we don't even know there's a issue, and I'll give you a silly example. I chew on one side of my mouth. And I went to the dentist, and he said, you're wearing down your teeth on one side of your mouth because you should be chewing on both sides of your mouth. Well, I didn't know that everybody else chewed on both sides of their mouth. And then, or an even better example is, I found out that I have ADHD a couple of years ago. I didn't know that, but it never occurred to me or my parents or any of my teachers to think that I might have ADHD. And if I knew it, I could have used strategies to handle some of the anxiety that goes with ADHD. So I think the benefit of these types of discussions and the work you're doing and that we're all doing is that maybe somebody's listening and they think, well, that's interesting. She talked about she's really good in this way, but these were the problems that she had. And I myself, or my child, or my wife, or my friend is displaying that. So it allowed, I think these conversations encourage people or employers or to become curious. So it's like, and I remember Lisa Lang, a reporter, she's a pretty famous reporter, is certainly in the US and I think globally. She realized that she had ADHD. And she was like, no, I don't have ADHD because I'm so productive, which I am as well when I'm not in the grief process that I'm working right now. And so I remember listening to this interview with her and thinking, that's my life. You just explained my life. And that was after I'd gotten the diagnosis. But I think having these conversations helps us all to maybe take the burden off just the teachers or the burden off just whoever, to say, well, that's interesting. Why is my child so good with writing, but so poor with oral or whatever? And I think the more we have these conversations about neurodiversity, it allows us to understand that, once again, if you have dyslexia, you're not broken. You use your brain differently. If you have ADHD, you can add great value to society. If you are born with Down syndrome, like my daughter, she's not garbage. She's not something just to throw away. I mean, there's societies that are now, they've eradicated Down syndrome. Well, that makes us feel a little weird, because it's like, well, are we saying that some human beings are not valuable? So I just think these conversations are really important, and we need to continue to have them.
And I think one of the things that's really powerful, it's like what Brené Brown talks about around vulnerability and shame. It's actually how we interpret what a negative is. I know what happiness is because I know what sadness is. I know what joy is because I know what it's like to feel upset, And actually what you see is you have all these emotions. And actually the reason why we understand what positive emotions are is because we experience what we perceive as negative emotions. But actually, we need the full range of the emotional spectrum. There was someone who was talking, as you mentioned, around grief, and they were saying that the reason you experience that is because of how much joy that person brought you or how much love that person brought you. And it's actually really important to sort of process those feelings. So I think one of the things I've had to learn through doing more mindfulness practice and doing more reading around shame and vulnerability is that actually everything is a strength. Everything is just how you interpret it and how you perceived it. I used to have this story going on, I'm not good enough, I'm not intelligent enough. And it was really interesting. I sort of achieved so much, and one day went, oh my God, look at what I've achieved. And I hadn't recognized how far I'd gone. And I hadn't appreciated that learn about growing a company, the more I realised actually this is a skill which other people don't have. And the skills that I have, other people in my team have different skills, and the world goes round because of that sort of magnitude of the team. And so I think it's really important that parenting styles of children. It's around, rather be very careful about what society says is good isn't necessarily good for your child. And one thing I always emphasize if I talk to parents is that whatever happens, your child has a strength in something. It might not be writing and reading, but it might be building, it might be drawing, it might be building relationships with people. And if you foster somebody and you look at their strengths, focus on their strength, and also help them to enable them in the areas they find more challenging, that child tends to have a good psychological relationship with themselves. And if I walked around saying that I can do, and I might not be able to do that, but I'm really good at this, then that brings that sense of worth. And one of the things that Brené Brown looks at is that sense of acceptance and worth. And it doesn't matter if your child is imperfect, because what is perfection? Perfection is in the eye of the beholder. And as we know, people's perceptions change in different situations. So as long as you have a really good internal core values, like I believe in myself, I believe in the fact that I have good morals, I'm trying to do the best for people. And if you build that self-belief and build those values internally, then you tend to find that you're not so affected by expectation of society. And as we know, expectation changes dependent upon the circumstances, the situation. I mean, like, if, for example, expectations of body shapes have changed over the years, fashion has changed over the years. So I just think it's really important for people to build that internal core. And what we find, even if that person is not raised in that way, then actually by doing sort of CBT, confidence-based coaching, has a huge difference, because that person starts to believe in themselves. Because they start to shift their focus 10% on what they can do rather than what they focus on. I used to put loads of emphasis on what I couldn't do without really looking at what I could do.
That's hugely important. I think, you know, when we focus on our strengths, it enables us to fly. When we concentrate on our weaknesses and looking at deficits, it's going to drag us down. We've reached the end of our half hour. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been a great chat. I've really enjoyed it. And we look forward to you joining us on Twitter. Thank you very much, Nicola James.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.